We're going to move on to our third speaker, Shona Mair, who is an intensivist out of Queensland Kids, and is apparently quite good at interpretive dance, although I'm not sure that we're seeing that today. That might be more for the party on Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll see. So before Liz take that off you and get feedback, I think third time's charm, yeah. Now, my life at the moment is a bit like a country music song, and the last straw was my nearly 2-year-old. I found her crouched over my laptop last night where I had not saved my talk to the cloud or the slides or anything, with an open bottle of Windex. So if anyone's looking for a new shiny metal tabletop, I've got something that can be converted. So I've just quickly thrown together a rehash of my talk. And so I'm just going to be cheating a little bit here. But as was said, I'm a paediatric intensivist, and got a little teary in some of Liz's stuff there, because I feel like I'm a regional/rural-ist at heart that's unfortunately fallen in love with an urban specialty. So like most other paediatric medical subspecialists that have chosen this path, I work almost exclusively in a tertiary quaternary referral centre in the state's capital. So you might be familiar with the sprawling green and purple building on the corner, which, as Vasan has mentioned, despite its colourful exterior, I don't think anyone would blame you if you referred to it as an ivory tower. And so, like 90% of Queensland's population, I now live 50 k's from the coastline, but I grew up in a regional town, a bit bigger, but not unlike Armidale. And I'll acknowledge the privilege of my white middle-class upbringing, in that the schools that I went to had a student body that was made up of day students and boarding students. And so many of my friends growing up were from out west, which, if you're on the eastern seaboard, means that they were from out bush. And they lived with their families on remote properties or farms, and 4 times a year they'd make the trek. 5, 6, 8, 10-hour journey to school, where they'd stay for the term. And I have pretty fond childhood memories of joining my friend Jane on her family's cattle property in the school holidays, where I learnt to drive in grade 6. And so having another 11-year-old coaching me on how to change the clunky gears of the farm ute nearly ended up with something Bhavesh could have treated me with, a deep burn on my calf from when I was learning how to ride a dirt bike. Could have very easily ended up in either the Royal or the Mater ICU with a head injury back in 1990. A tip with learning to drive at 11 on a property is stuck with me ever since. I've never had to use it. But, you know, if you run over a snake, just be careful, especially if you're not wearing any long pants. Apparently, they can you just might give them a nice warm home underneath the car. So when you step out of that cab, ankle. So look out. Oh no, I've lost my cheat sheet. So like many others, my rural clinical experience, apart from being a med student in Katherine and Thursday Island, was honed during my second year, doing stints rural relieving in single doctor towns. Have we got any rural generalists here at all? Yeah, I am in awe of you, and I fangirled you for many years, and I did think that I was going to end up a rural generalist once upon a time, but unfortunately I also met a boy and discovered a specialty that wouldn't allow that. But these terms were the first time I had to accept sole responsibility for the clinical decisions that I made, and I was not ready to make a lot of those clinical decisions. And in fact, the bits that caused me the most anxiety, and probably which tipped me into sort of acute medicine, were sitting in the GP clinic when the people in the waiting room are still there. I had no idea how to put in a depot, but they were booked for their 15-minute appointments, bulk billed, expecting that, and I had to churn through them with no idea what I was doing. Once I got up to the hospital to do my rounds of the nursing home patients or the snotty kids that hadn't been able to make an appointment with me down there, I was at home. Once I got the really sick people that came through the door, I was also at home, because we got trained that you could call this one number and they would sort things out for you. And so, oh no, that, that happened for the most part, but I've lost my thing, here we go. That happened for the most part, and the first time I went to my Singer Doctor Town to relieve, a chap, Colin, none of these are paediatric patients, I didn't encounter any of them then, but this chap Colin came in with horrible refractory fistulating Crohn's disease with little stoma bags all over his belly, with suppurative stuff pouring out. And I managed to make that one phone call after doing the first steps. Next thing, I'm speaking to his gastroenterologist at the local regional centre. Oh no, he shouldn't come here. Let's connect you through. And I had a conference call with the surgical registrar, the medical registrar attached to the IBD team at the local tertiary centre. And the four of us quickly chatted, and before I could finish the paperwork, we had a team on the oval across the road ready to pick this guy up and take him to the centre. Now that's it done well, and I always think about that, because the next time I went out to a place, again, a stubborn old bat of a lady who didn't want to go. She probably had an acute bowel obstruction and then chest pain with ECG changes. I had an ISTAT and the ability to dipstick my wee, and so I was terrified, and back then didn't have the wherewithal to be able to sit with the discomfort of somebody choosing an option that I wasn't comfortable with, which is different for me now, and so I talked her into being retrieved. Now this time it was not quite as smooth. I rang and I rang and I rang, and I think I spoke to each surgical registrar at each hospital up the coast. If they accepted, they then wanted me to ring the med-reg so that we'd get an automatic consult. So I rang the med-reg, and if I got through that, then they would say, can you make sure that the bed manager has a bed available? And so then I would ring, and sometimes they'd get 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3, but not all 3 at once. Just as I'd managed to, and then there was the helpful suggestion of, yeah, I'll probably accept them, but let's wait till the report of the CT's back. It's called urban-splaining. Just as I managed to find a disposition for this lady, and I sat down to actually do the clinical medicine other than putting a drip in and starting some fluids. And I actually sat down to be able to ask her a bit more about those wishes and why she didn't want to leave. Just as I went to actually care for my patient, in bustled the director of nursing saying, uh-oh, the fixed wing crew is grounded. They've hit a roo. Why didn't you do a roo run? A what? I didn't know that I was supposed to organise, in addition to finding a bed and an accepting team and get some clinical advice, I was also supposed to ring the local cop because the plane was due to land at dusk, and that's when the roos like to hang out on the tarmac, which is nice and warm. I was supposed to get the cop to do some lappies with the lights blaring to clear the roos. So the Don took that crew off to the pub for dinner while I sat with my lady and waited for the next crew and the mechanic to come to fix that plane. And so now I find myself in that pointy end, the ivory tower paediatrics, and so a great deal of paediatric specialty and subspecialty services are accessed through good multidisciplinary teams and medical specialists who are based in centralised children's hospitals. And many of those teams will provide outreach clinics to communities in regional and rural areas to have their planned outpatient specialty consults. but traditionally PICU isn't really a service which is suited to this model. And so the patients and families I look after need to come to me. So some of them are planned admissions, mostly surgical subspecialty patients that have PICU post-op booked beds, and others are unplanned, and so they come in through our emergency department if they happen to live in the Metro South radius, or from Dave's emergency department if they have a sore ball. Oh no, they don't come to PICU for that. Or from other Metro emergency departments. So they're transferred from other hospitals where they present. And depending on where you live, as we've kind of heard, if you need to access emergency or inpatient care, it might be, especially if you have something wrong with you that requires hands laid on or a procedure, that the only way that you can access that is I like the waiting for the retrieval team that our regional colleagues have alluded to, is by waiting for that team and or an inter-hospital transfer. And increasingly that telehealth is used not just in the way that Jeff's mentioned to it with that direct patient interface, but as an adjunct to help us make the decisions. Because when you have the bushfires and the floods and the poor weather, as I've got members of the retrieval team in this room, as they will tell you, you can't move. And so you have to support that patient where they are. And I think that we could be and should be doing that a bit better. But I'm saying that from my perspective. And I'd like to hear more, I guess, from the perspective of the people that actually work in these settings as to whether that assumption is the right assumption or not. Because sometimes I think that you can tell a lot by telehealth, and you have to trust in the assessment and the communication of the clinicians that are caring for that child. You also have to recognise your place as an advisor, as a suggester. You don't have the clinical decision-making power over that child, but you can advise and you can guide, and in collaboration you can come up with a management plan. So locally here, coordination of paediatric inter-hospital transfers is split between 3 separate but interlinked services. I've taken the names off them, but one of them is the service that I, for the last 18 months, have been the clinical director of. That's called CATCH, the Children's Advice and Transport Coordination Hub. But also we have Checkers, which is the Children's Health Queensland Retrieval team, and they're the service that actually go out and fetch the child. And we've got 3 of our nurses here in the audience. And if you're a paediatric intensivist that works in Brisbane, you also form part of that system as a paediatric medical coordinator for the southern zone. So Mackay and up goes north, anything south comes to us. And so we're coordinating patients which quite frankly are probably outside of our scope, because sometimes I'm stretching back and remembering my time in the paediatric emergency department in order to make the clinical judgments that I need to make. And then we're all reliant upon RSQ, which is the Retrieval Services Queensland, which helps coordinate the ins and outs of the aeromedical assets that the state has, and the charities like Lifelight and others, and also links in with the Royal Flying Doctors Service, which have their own governance structure. So it's a complex system, and it's confusing. And it's confusing for those that are referring, but it's even confusing for those that are within the system. So when I first took the job with CATCH, it really appealed to me because I thought, this is a service. We only look after the ins and outs of the hospital up there, the Queensland Children's Hospital. So in its current state, hopefully this may change in the future, we aren't able to help with transfers and back transfers outside of Queensland Children's Hospital. But as most of the subspecialty medical cognitive treasures are housed within our hospital, we also facilitate clinicians to be able to be put in touch with the right clinicians to be able to give advice that might help support children to stay where they are, if that is an appropriate thing. And again, we need to be guided by the referring clinicians who will know whether that is an appropriate thing. So when I first took on that position, I thought this is confusing. So I thought I'd do a process map to try and work out what's going on. And you're about to see what goes on inside my brain. So I thought, I'll take a child with an acute illness, whether that be critically unwell or not, but not a planned illness, not an outpatient monitored illness. And if they present to any facility across Queensland and some northern New South Wales, and if that kid or the infant presents to a regional or metro facility without access to paediatric subspecialty medical and or paediatric general or subspecialty surgical services, or a child or infant in a rural or remote facility without paediatric inpatient services, so it's my way of listing off anywhere in Queensland that isn't the tertiary centre, how do we facilitate that kid to either stay where they are with a bit of support, if it's recognised by the clinicians, and we take note of the clinicians that are working in that service, that it's not appropriate for them to stay, or that they need a bit of guidance and help and support in order to keep that kid there, or if an asset is off, meaning the planes are down, or if there's rains and we can't move that kid, how do we keep that kid there? Or how do we get it to where they need to get it to? This is what I mapped out. I didn't even finish. There's a lot of gaps there. So the healthcare system's incredibly complex. We know that. We can feel that. I'm sure you all feel that every day. It's more complex than it used to be, apparently. I think it is. That's why we get those generational gaps of, I used to be able to do this, that and the other. I was like, you didn't carry around the thoughts that are going inside all of our heads or the questions that we get asked. You used to have like your lunch made for you. The cognitive load is real. So it's a complex system, and a complex system is one in that there are many interacting parts, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to predict the behaviour of the system based on just knowing the composite parts. So mapping this thing is one point, but the number of people and steps and decisions that go into either keeping a kid that's acutely unwell where they are, or getting them safely in a timely manner and in a way that meets the needs from communication and understanding and not undermining the ongoing health interactions in the hospital, that communicates sufficiently with all the different facets, that does all of these things, is a mammoth task. Here, I'm going to go to my my old school. Excuse my intention, my tremor. I'm a bit nervous, but it's also a combination of fatigue and just genetics, I think. So to get, which one's the dot? So to get the kid from here, which is the starting point, either to stay there or down here, you've got the referring clinicians and team. Each of these diamonds is a clinical decision, and each of the squares is a step. Here, this is red, but it's the black box that is these 3 Venn diagram bubbles I showed you before that makes up the advice and movement system machine that seems to be difficult to interpret even from the inside. And here are the receiving clinicians or the advising clinicians, wherever that kid, if they manage to get to where they need to be. Yeah, it's complex, and clinical decisions in of themselves. If you take each one of those diamonds being a clinical decision, and that's just the broad brush strokes, it's incredibly complex. So the potential for error is huge. The potential for risk is huge. So imagine that you're a clinician based in a fictional town, which we'll call Mount Hitheroo, and a 3-year-old comes in with undifferentiated abdominal pain. It's a good one. She's had subjective fevers at home, and the nursing staff take some obs, and initially she's a bit pale and clammy and subdued, and things might be settling as you complete your history taking from her dad who brought her in. You've got access to an eye stat and urine dipstick. It's your investigation tool belt. But not much else. And there's a hospital 90 minutes away by road that has a mix of GP, rural generalists, 8 rural generalists in that town. So they're a mixture of GP anaesthetists, GP obstetricians, and one of them has a diploma of peds. There's a scanner there and an ultrasonographer on call. And there's a regional hospital with general peds and general surge, but not sure whether they've got the right anaesthetic mix to be able to anaesthetise the child if you do find something that's surgical in there. And it's a chopper distance away. And then the tertiary referral centre, the paediatric centre, is a fixed wing distance away, and it has access all to the paediatric minutiae of there. So you don't just get a CT scan, but you get a thin slice, minimised radiation CT scan that looks at what the peculiarities of Dr. X, Y, and Z want for their investigations. What do you do? And if you're in the mind of the people in that blue zone here, if you're the receiving clinician that gets that phone call, I want to send this kid, what do you do then? What questions do you ask? You get trained to assess kids or patients yourself, but now you're having to assess them through the eyes of another clinician who you don't know. You don't know their experience, you don't know what cognitive biases they have, you don't know how fatigued they are, you don't know what the pieces of information that they're processing and inputting in are going to spit out. Do you trust their assessment? Do you not? Do you start again? Well, we have to trust. By being members of a team, by being clinicians in the system, we do trust our colleagues, whether we realise we do it or not, or else we couldn't function because there's too many parts, there's too many facets, there's too many sides. So according to, we take information based on our clinical assessment, the patient, the history, observation, examination. We take it in the context or the environment that we're in. In paediatrics, we consider the patient's place in the family unit. Are there other kids at home? Who's looking after your other kids? Have you got stuff to do that? Have you got transport? Because there might not be room for you in the plane when the plane comes to get you. If you do have transport, but the plane can take you, are you going to do that? Oh, well, how are you going to get your car back there? We have to take all of these things into consideration, and that's just one little part of that little puzzle up there. And then we add to that information gathered by others in the team. We add to that the information that we gather from the ISTAT, from the urine dipstick, to form our first clinical decision, which is, can this kid stay or do they need to go? Can I watch them? Do I even have a choice? If I have a choice, who do I ask? I've got the big red dots. So according to the dual process theory, we process information in 2 ways. System 1, it's the fast automated decisions an experienced clinician makes without even thinking, the gestalt of diagnostics, the early initiation of appropriate management. And then systems 2 is more effortful and slower. It involves rational analysis and evaluation of the information available. But we're human, and so we have this natural preference for the easy road, the path of least resistance. Especially when we're tired, when we've got competing priorities. It's easier just to, not that I'm suggesting people do this, but to send the kid than worry about it, especially if I know I've got a whole waiting room full of patients to be seen back at the clinic and I've just nipped up for 5 minutes to eyeball this and get the ball rolling. Yet this clinician is asking me why I'm not hovering by the bedside as though I've got a whole fleet of doctors to replace me or somebody else to continue seeing the patients in clinic. So it's easier just to get them on the road and somewhere else. They'll be safe there, that'll be better. They'll get access to those tests. I'm the receiving clinician or the advising clinician. I'm the peds reg, I've got 16 patients still to see, I've got 10 drips to do. They're on at me about something up here and oh shit, there's a MET call I've got to go. So it's easier, yeah, that sounds good, just send it. So I think that's where we come in the red bit. and you know, the red bit is the system, the black box, the clinical advice, the moving. We've got some visibility that the others don't have as well. What plane's down, what the weather's here, how many pilot hours. Also, we're relying on somebody else for that information too. So I think that clinicians that sit in that space, I would love for us over time to get better at synthesising that bridge between the referrer and the receiver, because we carry with it some extra information in terms of risk of movement, risk of staying, risk of coming. It all has risk, and it's how to balance it up. But not every one person, like I said before, has a complete view of the entire situation. And that's where that clinical trust comes in. Now, my rush to finish giving up on my new coffee table and putting together my slides and getting here in time, I've forgotten my nice, neat, uniting statement that brings it all together. But you know what? It's all a bit too hard because it is difficult and it is complex. But we do need to learn up here to trust the people here, and the people here to trust the people here, and all in here to trust everyone together. And I think telehealth can play a good part here in bridging that gap. Not the telehealth where you're with the patient, but the telehealth where you're supporting in conjunction with a clinician that is actually caring and having responsibility for that patient to come up with a collaborative decision together on what to do next. Booking in a time to revisit that. Offering a lifeline for if things change. That's where I'd like to get in the future in a bit more of a reliable, reproducible manner, but baby steps. Anyway, bridge that gap between Gold Coast, where I had my first consultant job, and the sensory open air skies. I can smell that picture. Can you smell that picture there? I can feel the sun on my skin. And I think you might have another recruit on your hand in regional or rural Queensland. You want a paediatric intensivist? I've got general peds as well under my belt. Anyway.
Thank you, Shona. Any questions from the floor about that? Oh, over there. Yep. Hang on. Do my steps again.
Thanks, Shona. As a rural generalist, it's really reassuring to hear that and your interest in, I guess, considering that from the city you're actually caring for kids wherever they are in the state or even northern New South Wales, and you can actually outreach to do that. That's great. And I think it's the 1 in 10 or so that we want to ring about who are really, really sick or nearly drowned or intubated or whatever, and we need you and you need to help us right there and then. That telehealth is great, but it is that other 9 out of 10 where it's actually we want your assistance to keep the child with us and to care for them and to give the parents a reassurance. And I think what we need, and this is I guess where the question is, to get that sort of concept from Jeff, or that simplicity where we're on a ward round, we'd really like a paediatrician right next to us, so me, my nurse, the parents, and you can have a chat and say, and again, it might not be you, it might be the regional paediatrician or maybe one of the emergency paediatricians, and actually just do it together quickly. And that telehealth system has to be quite quick and efficient, like Jeff's got. So I just wonder if there's a possibility to sort of combine expertise there and help us out.
I think there is, but we've got to get it right. And I was interested. I hadn't met Scott before, but we've corresponded, and there's Jeff's working privately with Dave in that space, but I'm bound by what Queensland Health will or will not fund. But I think that there is opportunity. I'm just really impatient, and because I can see how it should work, and why can't everybody see that this should just be done now? But I guess to be realistic, we've got to it's got to be win-win for the blue person as well as the green person, and that's the bit I'm not quite sure on how to execute yet. So when I first stepped into this role in Catch, I thought, oh, this is great. It's the keeping the kids there. It's that 9 kids out of 10. It's that grey zone of making these collaborative decisions. And I can remember there's only, in that 18 months, there's only been 1 or 2 I've been involved in where I go, yeah, this is it. We got the TPN to the kid instead of the kid to the TPN, like that kind of scenario, because to keep a kid where they are actually requires a whole lot more work for the blue person and the green person, because it all gets absorbed in that red bit. Or easier to say bring them, because then they just become one of the 10 kids in front of you that you absorb in your ward round, and that's not sustainable. And so it's about convincing the people up there to invest in having those complex conversations and having the time out to be able to do that. Because right now, my service pesters Bavesh's registrars or the PEDS regs out of service. They're trying to operate, they're trying to learn, they're trying to pick up this complex skill, and they're getting 6,000 messages. So we've got to work in building that up right, so it offloads that cognitive load for both the clinicians at the blue end and the clinicians at the green end, and gets absorbed somewhere in the middle. And we don't have that right yet, but I think there's more interest in that, at least on paper, or via email there is, the government saying they want to invest in innovative new models of care, but we'll see.
Okay, I'm sorry, I know there's more questions, but we really are out of time. Thank you for a fantastic session. If you would just join with me to thank the speakers.